Jeremy Fowler of the Mothership, senior national NFL writer, joining us on the program. So let me start with the Bengals last night, Jeremy. Your reaction to the Bengals signing those guys and what that means for the rest of this team on the other side of the ball.
Yeah, Dan, so this had been trending this way because Friday night there was some momentum that the Bengals were going to be able to reach a deal with both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, who have the same agent. So this became a bit of a package deal a couple months ago when Higgins switched agencies. And so, it was interesting. The Bengals really a couple months ago were telling me that, hey, we're going to try to sign all three of these guys, Chase, Higgins, and Trey Hendrickson. So they've somehow pulled off two of the three, even though they cost themselves millions of dollars waiting on Jamar Chase. If they would have signed him maybe 8 months ago or even 6 months ago, the price probably would have been $20 million less, but he put together this Triple Crown season. So they've cost themselves a lot. Now they have Burrow, Chase, Higgins on really well over $100 million per year in just cash they're going to have to pay these guys, which makes it infinitely harder to get Trey Hendrickson done. Even though they're not overly eager to trade him, they really haven't engaged a lot in teams that have interest. And so they're trying to get this done too. I don't know how they're going to pull it off, especially with a team that is not really known for this, spending at this kind of clip. But they are determined to surround Joe Burrow with what they can. And meanwhile, their defense has like minimal parts because they have to somehow draft and develop some guys on the cheap now.
But I'm just trying to understand. These owners are smart enough to make $1 billion or $2 billion to be able to buy these teams. I just don't understand why you don't. If you know you're going to keep Jamar Chase, then sign him when you can. The Cowboys do this. There are certain teams that you just go, why are they waiting? Now, maybe there's some math involved in this, and I'm not smart enough to understand it. But if you know you're keeping them, then what are you waiting for?
Yeah, that's a valid argument. You're seeing it right now. I mean, just an hour ago, Derek Stingley Jr., top cornerback for the Texans, signs for 3 years, $90 million, which is sticker shock for that position. But he's only 3 years into a first-round pick deal. So they already had him for 2 years of contractual control. You do it now to be able to spread that money out over 5 years instead of like 4. So that helps them to do it early. Buffalo's known for that. Like they've been really aggressive with all their veteran players this offseason to try to get it done. Whatever the price is now, it's only going to go up. So I think teams are more trying to inherit that logic. The Philadelphia Eagles have mastered that. They're really aggressive. But look, some teams, they either don't want to pay it, or in some cases, they feel like what the agent and the player are trying to get is sort of untenable or something they're not comfortable with. I think that happens a lot. And look, Dallas, I don't know if they'll ever say this, but the fact that they have waited on some of these, it's good for entertainment. Keeps them in the news. We talk about Dallas every day, like Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb. There has to be a cost. Well, there has to be a benefit for them associated with waiting 6 months till late August, early September. Even though I think it was a 2 to tango type situation, that wasn't all on the team in that case. But it's good for business, and Dallas knows that.
I remember when Dan Orlovsky was on the show and he said, I don't think Jerry Jones really cares about winning as much as keeping his name, his team in the news. Like, it's hard to fathom that for a guy who seems desperate to win one more Super Bowl. But do you think that's first and foremost? That's the game plan is we love when you talk about the Cowboys, it's good for business.
I think it's both. Both can be true. You can handle all that and still try to win. Like I was looking at my list because before free agency, I did predict that Dallas would maybe be a little more aggressive than they were last year, or that people thought. Like there's assumption that they're really cheap and all this stuff, but they signed like up to 7 starters last week. Not to huge money, more role players, but like they filled voids of what could be 7 of their 22 starters. Like that's pretty, I wouldn't call it aggressive, but that's like, modest shopping. So that's something. I mean, they're not just out here trying to put on a bad product. Like they draft pretty well, and they don't want to overpay for guys. It's one of those things where they have paid their stars. Like they paid Dak Prescott, they paid CeeDee Lamb. They do have a penchant for doing that. They just do it uncomfortably and sort of wait. But Micah Parsons will get paid. Like unless something goes really haywire over the next 4 months, he will be paid to be a Dallas Cowboy, and he'll be paid handsomely.
Did the Seahawks have a good couple of weeks here? I'm trying to gauge.
Yeah.
What do you think?
If you feel like Sam Darnold is comparable, or like maybe 80% of the player Geno Smith is, then yes, they had a really good week. DK Metcalf didn't want to be there. Geno Smith didn't want to be there, based mostly on the contract. I mean, there were whispers last year of him being really frustrated that they wouldn't redo his deal. And I just think Seattle, they showed it with Russell Wilson too. Like, they just don't feel like paying quarterbacks these crazy numbers. Like, they're taking a stand a little bit and saying, like, we're just not going to do that. They were always hesitant to do it with Russell Wilson. It got ugly. It got ugly with Geno Smith. Like, they want to build the roster different ways. You're going to see the 49ers, they've scaled back a bunch of salaries in part because they have to pay Brock Purdy a massive number. Seattle's saying no. And I kind of respect that. Minnesota is saying no. They said no to Kirk Cousins last year. So there are different ways to build a roster. I think because of that, like, really with Sam Darnold, you're getting him for probably $10 million a year less than the Raiders are going to have to pay Geno Smith, and you got a third-round pick for flipping him in a trade. If you like Sam Darnold a lot, that's good value. Like, they had a good week. Cooper Kupp, he's 31, some injuries, but like, he can still play. DK Metcalf, you never want to trade a guy that talent, but they get a second-round pick for him, and he didn't want to be there. And they didn't want to pay him. So if you're Seattle and you say, okay, we don't want to allocate these massive resources to these players, they did about the best they could. But now they have question marks with a team that already had them. That's sort of the issue.
Help me understand what the Vikings are doing. And I don't know if they need to say, if they've gotten to that point, we're not interested in Aaron Rodgers. Like, right. they could do that and, put an end to this.
Yeah.
But they haven't done
out the fire. You're right. And it's curious, and I'm trying to find out what that means. The people I've talked to with the organization have been pretty consistent with their message with me. It's that Aaron Rodgers is possible but unlikely. That's sort of the messaging that I've gotten. So that's what I'm taking. So I'm leaving room for a wild card, something crazy to happen with Rodgers. I don't expect it. I think they're ready to roll with JJ McCarthy. I think it's very possible they're waiting on some of these dominoes to fall and figure out how much money they need to spend on a good backup so that it doesn't mess up their comp pick formula, because they want future draft picks. If you spend a certain amount in free agency without losing enough players and that balance is off, you don't get as many draft picks. So that's a consideration for them. So they're trying to play the long game a little bit and the smart game and not overreact here, because they spent a lot of money on other positions last week. But all their moves, especially with like two big offensive line signings, says we're all in on JJ McCarthy and his development. Like, from what they've told me, like, he has already proven he is going to be their franchise guy. It just depends on whether it happens today, 4 months from today, 12 months from today, but they're convinced of that. And so they're just only willing to go so far. I'd be surprised if Rodgers is there. I still think he'll be, if I had to bet right now, a Pittsburgh Steeler. Meanwhile, the Giants are just sort of like scouring the earth for quarterback help. Like, they're still having Jameis Winston come in for a visit, Joe Flacco. Russell Wilson was there last week. Like, they're keeping all their options open with the hopes that they can still get Rodgers.
What's Pittsburgh's plan B?
That's a great question. So, like, look, that last week or a week and a half ago, they put together an offer for Justin Fields that I was told was very competitive with what the Jets offered him, which was 2 years, $40 million with $30 million guaranteed. Something went off where he chose the Jets, and he must have felt the love more from the Jets than he did the Steelers, who essentially benched him last year for Russell Wilson. So he gets a fresh start. I do believe they were all in on Fields. I don't know if they had Fields ahead of Rodgers, but they were willing to do Fields. Like, both sides at one point were open to it. It didn't work. And so now, I just checked with the Steelers. They don't have any updates. They're waiting on the situation. They're not bringing any other quarterbacks in for visits that I'm aware of, so they're not playing the Giants game. They're waiting on Rodgers. They have Mason Rudolph as a backup.
Wow.
They signed him just sort of as insurance last year, 2 years, $8 million, because he started games there before. Like, they at least know if the bottom falls out, they have him and can draft somebody. I think that would probably be the play at this point. They know Russell Wilson well. I don't sense a lot of momentum with Pittsburgh and Russell Wilson at this point. And plus, you're going back to your third option now. Hey, you started games for us last year, but now you're our number 3. Let's make this work. It just doesn't seem like a even marriage.
Damn. And then the Giants have to wait for everybody, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the Giants, I do know that Russell Wilson has looked at the Giants as a viable option for a while now, even dating back to the Super Bowl or around the end of the season. So he must have seen some of those dominoes coming. So I do think that will eventually be the play. If the money's right, I think he still looks at himself as a valuable starter, and that costs money. I'm curious how far teams are willing to go just because of the musical chairs he's played the last 3 years with different organizations at quarterback. So, he's got a cap where you have to work it out financially, and these teams will probably be looking more for like a lower end bridge deal. And I don't know if he's willing to accept that at this stage, given all that he's done and all the Pro Bowls that he's made and the Super Bowl pedigree. So that complicates things a little bit. But my sense is, if Rodgers goes to Pittsburgh, Russell Wilson slides right into that Giants spot unless things get crazy.
But can you see the Giants taking Shedeur Sanders? Could you see the Giants actually try? Yeah. I don't know if Tennessee's going to actually take Cam Ward. They sound like they are, but I don't believe anything until it happens. But can you see the Giants being aggressive with either one of these quarterbacks?
Yes. And even before the Aaron Rodgers talk, when they were going for Matthew Stafford, like they spent a month on trying to get Matthew Stafford and put together big financial packages, and they were sort of left at the altar. But the sense coming out of the combine was if they strike out on Stafford, they're going to go draft. They're going to go heavy there with that third pick, maybe try to trade up. I still think that's a possibility. If you get Rodgers or even Wilson to a lesser extent like that, at least frees you up to not have to do that if you don't want to give up too much. But some of that was predicated on Tennessee wanting to move back. It does seem like now, again, a lot can happen with the draft. I won't make sweeping determinations, but from what I've gathered, they seem pretty comfortable with Cam Ward. Like there's some momentum there with other teams I've talked to league-wide that they feel like they're just going to sit there and take Ward. I know the interviews with Ward have gone well. They feel comfortable with like the mistakes he has made on the field. They feel like he's done a good job of explaining those and can be coached and correct them. And he's got the obvious upside on top of that. So if you equal all that out, you sense a little momentum for the Titans to sit put. That could complicate things for the Giants if they're comfortable with Shedeur at 3 or even moving up to 2. Is that too rich for them? I think they're weighing all those things, but in the short term, they've got to figure this out and at least get a solution bird in hand with a veteran free agent.
But can you see the Browns taking Shedeur Sanders?
So the Browns have been probably the most unpredictable in all this. Like, they don't have a lot of money to spend. I do think Kirk Cousins could be in play for them because of the familiarity with Kevin Stefanski, but there's not. Atlanta really is just, they don't want to move him. And then if they do move him, they're going to want somebody to pay a good amount of that offset money with the $37 million they owe him. So that complicates things for the Browns because they're paying Deshaun Watson. They're looking at guys like Carson Wentz too as sort of contingency plans. So they've been all over the map, really. They acquired Kenny Pickett last week. So they've been tough to figure out a little bit. I do know that they like Shedeur. To what extent, if they're willing to pick him 2 overall, I cannot say. I do know there's some love there for Shedeur Sanders and sort of his computer brain to be able to, feel out the game mentally. Like they have some respect for what Shedeur can do in that area, maybe more than some teams.
Great stuff, Jeremy. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks again, Dan. Appreciate it, man.
Jeremy Fowler, ESPN senior national NFL writer.